Greetings and salutations, everyone. I do hope everyone is still doing well, and welcome to this second half. Before we jump into it, a couple quick links. As many of you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, channel membership, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon, PayPal, and channel membership is in the description below. Merch is displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman, Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support this channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It does not cost you a cent. Click that like button, takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads I put out daily, click the bell icon, and folks, please leave a comment and share the video. Why? Well, because all of these things really do help the channel to continue to grow and go. They definitely do matter, and they are appreciated. With that, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's jump in to tonight's second half, shall we? Today's first encounter. When I was in 7th grade, I was outside with my dog in Tennessee, lying on a dirt mound, looking up at the clouds, just passing time. It was around 5:30 p.m. when my dog started to bark and pull at the leash. We lived in the countryside, so we had woods surrounding one half of our house. I tried hushing my beagle, but she persisted. I then stood up and looked in the direction she was looking to say, "Look, there isn't anything there." As I said that, a large black creature with a canine body sprinted out of the woods. This creature had thin fur that was so black it had a pearlescent hue, with almost a purple tint. The eyes were a mid-shade yellow, its legs were crooked backwards, and its hands were long and slender. It stood about 7 feet tall when standing on its hind legs. When it dropped to all fours, its back had an aggressive hunch, and it still maintained its fluid motion. Every step seemed pre-calculated. As it was sprinting, it tilted its head towards me as if it was aware of me, but couldn't be bothered by me being there. It then jumped over a 4-foot cattle fence without much difficulty. I'm a senior in high school now, and just last summer I had another experience. I was working with my father in his shed. He worked on motors and stuff. I had left my cell phone out in the shed. My friend was staying the night, so we headed back down to the shed when I realized I had left my phone there. It was about 10 o'clock, pitch black, about the same time of year as the previous encounter. We were standing outside in front of the shed trying to get the key into the keyhole when we heard a rustling in the brush in the woods. It was a very faint sound, like the breeze hitting the leaves. Both my friend and I heard it, so we turned our flashlights toward the brush, only to see a pitch-black shape standing in the light brush. The yellow eyes destroy my mind every time I recall the moment. My friend said, "Do you see that right?" By this time, I was already sprinting toward the house. Seeing this creature and knowing how it was just watching us tore my mind apart. It was so silent, I had a mental breakdown as soon as I got back to the house. I've never had such an intense reaction to anything. From then on, every time I went into the woods, I felt like something was watching me. I know this sounds crazy, and I get that. I struggle with telling anyone, and this is the first time I have reached out to share this experience with the public. Today's second encounter. For some backstory, I've always been in touch with the supernatural, ever since I was a baby. My mother told me that I saw, heard, and knew things that I shouldn't have. But when I got older, I started to repress this side of me, always trying to explain it by using science, but sometimes there are things that not even science can explain. From when I was 13 to 17, I lived in a house out in the countryside of Sweden. The house and what happened is a whole different story. We lived right by a lake. We had a dock with some old boats we found abandoned by a small beach near our home. During the summer, people would go boating and fishing. The Swedish name for this lake is Gravlängen, which roughly translates to long grave. It's rumored by the locals that back in the day, they used to dump bodies in the lake. I've tried researching this, but found no written document of this ever happening, so it's hard to say if it's true. Half Island, where we lived, a pretty big one covered in a dense forest. This is where I and many others have experienced many strange events. The forest is divided into two parts, each with its own trail that forks from a dirt parking lot. There's a field that divides the two parts. It was sort of like a shallow bog, and there's a big dead tree that stands alone. There's the right side of the forest where many would walk along the trail to get to the cape, which was deep in the forest. My brother and I would often play and do kid stuff on the right side of the forest. Both of us have witnessed strange things happening there. One of these instances is when we were deep in the forest around autumn, exploring and fighting with sticks. Then all of a sudden a man wearing a simple button-down shirt and brown suit pants just walked straight out of the bushes. Naturally, we were startled, but greeted the man politely. Now, what I found strange was that he walked really stiff and had a blank facial expression. His clothes he was wearing weren't weather appropriate since it was cold. When we greeted him, he just stood there, looked at us, and without saying a word, walked stiffly in a straight line into the thick tree line. Now, this incident is one of more explainable and tame events that happened in that forest, but nothing compares to the horror I experienced on the left side of that forest. The left side of the forest was rarely visited by anyone. It was mountainous and dense with trees and other vegetation. Prior to this experience, I had never really visited any part of that forest. This happened when I was 15. It was January of 2017, and it had recently snowed. It was cold. Winter morning, and I was bored out of my mind. I decided to take a walk in the forest with my dog we had at the time. His name was Coda, and he was a Shar-Pei, not the prettiest dog, and a bit of an asshole, but I loved him nonetheless. I put the leash on him, and we set off towards the forest. We get to the fork, and usually we would walk on the right side, let him off his leash, and he would run around, but sticking relatively close as I walked. But that day I wanted to explore the left side. It was like I had never known about that left side until that moment. Curiosity and a sense of adventure, I set off onto the trail leading up into the part of the forest, walking along on the edge of the field until the path leads up into the forest itself. We walked along the path, climbing over fallen trees and then downward until we entered a clearing. I unleashed Coda, and he runs like a maniac, as he would often do. The first thing I noticed was 4 oak in a near-perfect square. I even took some pictures. Past the oak, there were some young trees on the right-hand side of the far end of the clearing. If I remember correctly, it was birch. Then there were tire tracks that led into the forest to the left. How could a car get there is the mystery to me, but I followed them since the trail had ended. As I walk into the tree line where the tires were heading, I noticed an archway formed by fallen trees. As I walked along this quote-unquote road, there was a fallen hunting tower. It was covered in moss and seemed to have been there for a very long time. I kept going until I eventually ended up at a shoreline, and there I sat for a while reading a book as Kodo was doing his dog stuff. After a while I noticed it was getting late, and since it was winter, I had a bit over an hour of daylight left. Since it was only a 15-minute walk out of the forest, I was pretty relaxed and would make it home way before sunset. So I called for Coda and we set off. This is when it happened. We walked the same way that we came, Coda walking ahead as he would. Getting closer to the clearing, Coda makes it there before I do. As soon as he entered the clearing, he took a sharp right behind a tree and completely vanished. I was stunned. I got to the clearing, and as soon as I entered, it was like the world was put on mute. No wind, no birds, nothing. Only the sound of my breathing. It had started to snow as well. I walked further into the clearing, and I was all of a sudden overwhelmed with a feeling of dread, like my whole entire body was setting off alarms. I called out for my dog, and usually, not always, came right away. But there was no sign of him. He's not a gracious dog. You'd hear him if he was close, but he was gone. At this point, my body was in panic mode. I needed to leave. My brain was screaming for me to run, but I couldn't without Coda. Then I felt eyes all over me, coming from all around me. I felt like I was being watched by 1,000 eyes. I noticed it was getting dark far too quickly. Every second it was getting darker and darker. I was standing there too afraid to move, crying and desperately calling out for my dog. I was there for 7 minutes, and every second felt like a lifetime, and then I heard a loud snap of a branch breaking. I looked in the direction it was coming from, and that's when I saw it. Standing in the tree line far from where I was standing. It was only for a second, but that image is still burned into my mind to this day. It was huge, easily over 7 feet tall, and covered in the darkest black fur. It had the body of a moose, really thick, long front legs, and shorter hind legs. The head was of a predatory animal that I had never seen before. It looked like that photoshopped picture of a horse with a dog's mouth. It was the most horrifying thing I had ever seen. The eyes are what I remember the most. It was like looking into the embers of a fire. There was so much hatred in those eyes. Even if I only saw it for a second, like a flash, I still saw its eyes, even when I closed my eyes. Like when you stare at a lamp or a sun. I thought this was the end. Time stood still. Moments later, Coda comes from the tree line from my right. He walked right up to me and sat next to me. He never did this. I put the leash on him and bolted out of there. It was really dark at this point, and I could barely see where I was going. The feeling of terror was also added with the feeling, if I stop, I will die. I ran through the forest on the trail, practically jumping over fallen trees, and ran down the hill. As soon as I got out of the forest, the feeling of terror stopped. I caught my breath in the dirt parking lot and noticed the sound of the wind again. The sky was significantly lighter as well. I felt safe. I went home, ate dinner, and did not say a word about what happened. A few months later, I asked my mother about the left side if she ever went up there. My mother is a medium, so she feels bad energies and stuff like that. She told me that she stays away from the left side. She feels a very dark energy coming from up there. That's when I knew that what I experienced wasn't just a figment of my imagination. So why am I sharing this now? Well, my brother and I were talking about that place, recalling childhood memories. That's when he told me his scariest experience in that forest. He told me that he was on a walk on the right side, far in on the trail. He saw a deer leg placed half in the tall brush next to the trail. He said he remembers that it was fresh because blood was still dripping. He thought it was gross, kept walking, thinking no little of it. He walked to the cape and started to walk back. That's when his body felt that tense and the feeling of being watched. He picked up his pace until he got to where the deer leg was. That's when he noticed it was gone. It had only been 20 minutes since he was last there. That's when he knew he had to leave. Now, this could have been some fucked up hunter playing a prank, but he doesn't recall hearing any gunshots since the leg was fresh. It couldn't have been a wild animal since the half island isn't big enough for wolves, bears to live up north. When he told me that, I knew that it was the entity. There is definitely something wrong with this place. I know as long as I live, I am never stepping foot in those woods again. I've been trying to figure out what that thing was. Today's third part of the upload. Last October, I decided to go hiking each weekend in a different spot related to Michigan folklore. One of those trips was swinging out to Cadillac with a friend to check out the area where the Michigan Dogman originated. Starting at the lake, we took the White Pine Trail about 4 miles out before heading back, all in the bright light of the day. The first chunk of the trail is very populated as it takes you out of town. There's even a trail cat belonging to one of the houses off of it that came and snuggled us for a bit. But you eventually hit an intersection where the woods kind of start. On our way back, we crossed that intersection, having stopped to check for cars as it was super slow. And as we finished crossing the street, we both froze. After a few seconds of our own silence, we both started whispering to each other under our breaths. I pulled out my phone and started recording, but the sound didn't happen again. And we eventually carried on our way after a few minutes of hushed speculation. What we heard specifically were 3 subsequent howls of varying pitch, a middle note, a higher one, and then the lowest of all 3, all seeming to come from the same exact spot, and all sounding like they came from the same creature as well. Each howl lasted about a second, like half notes to a song something was trying to sing. In fact, we walked away only half joking, saying it felt like we were being serenaded by the Dogman himself. We still can't figure out what could have made that sound. It came from a small batch of brush on the northwest corner of the intersection, but there was nothing in there when we looked, and the batch was too small, maybe 5 feet deep, with too much empty space on the other side for something to run without us seeing it in ease. Just curious if anyone has ever been to Cadillac area and heard similar noises. There were no bad vibes or anything while we were experiencing it. If anything, we left that area feeling like something had been trying to play with or delight us a little bit. Thinking about visiting there again later. This fourth part of the upload. Before I begin, I would like to say that this is a very long experience. It's something that's haunted me since I was 6, since my first encounter with this creature. I've had dreams about this and 2 very specific encounters with the creature. I'm sharing this so I could possibly find help on what to do or how to get rid of this creature that's been hunting me since I can remember. For some background, I'm a 21-year-old female and still worry about this creature finding me, but I'll get into that detail later. I would always go camping with my grandparents, who I call Grammy and Grampy. At the end of my school years, I would always look forward to it, since I grew up loving the outdoors and the woods, especially loving camping, loving the idea of having s'mores, taking long hikes, being around a campfire, and of course the wildlife we would see. Now, I grew up in California, mostly near cities, so the forest was like my true home. I always preferred being near trees and dirt rather than buildings and crowded places. Besides, the woods were much quieter and more peaceful. I always felt safe when I was there, like nothing could ever hurt me. But something strange would always happen at the end of the month of May. I would have this reoccurring dream during the last week of my school year. I would be in the woods walking alone down a dirt trail. The woods were always strangely quiet. I would continue to walk this path until I saw this red fox poke its head from behind a tree. Its eyes were always strangely human-like, but they were yellow and somehow looked like teddy bear eyes. And it would just stare at me. It wouldn't make a sound at all. It would just watch me. Usually in my dream, I would go up and pet it, making the fox family make a noise, usually a soft growl. Then I would continue walking, and it would follow me. The first time I would have this dream was when I was actually around 5, and it lasted until I was perhaps 11. Over the years, it would be the same exact thing. I would walk into the woods, find this fox, pet it, then continue my hike with it alongside of me. But about having this dream for the 4th time, it would start to walk behind me. That's when I started to feel uneasy about this fox. I could hear it making odd noises, but every time I went back to look, it was just walking like nothing was wrong, even somehow giving me a smile. Sorry to go on about the dream, but I now believe that it was a warning of this creature. Now that the dream is out of the way, I can talk about my first true encounter. I was 6 years old and was going on a camping trip with my Grammy and Grampy for about a week. Of course, I was very excited about it, being able to barely keep myself in school seat for the last day of kindergarten. They had picked me up right as the bell had rung and already had the camping trailer attached to my Grampy's truck. I remember he drove an old red truck that only had 3 seats, me always being in the middle. It took about 2 hours to get there and another good hour to find our usual camping spot. It was deep in the woods and far from other people, as my Grammy wasn't too fond of being around other people while we camped. As they were setting up the camping trailer, I'd wander around the campsite, loving to dig in the dirt for bugs. I sat down on the dirt and started to dig, but I noticed how strangely quiet the woods were. It was never quiet, not even in the dead of night. I thought that was odd, but being only 6, I didn't think too hard about it. As I continued to dig for bugs, however, I thought I heard my Grammy call for me. She would usually call me Sugar Booger, that being a nickname she gave me since I was born. That's what I had heard. It sounded like she was very far away and somewhat sick. Sugar Booger. I looked up where I had heard it come from, that being from the woods, but there was no way she was there because she was still unloading stuff from the truck. Even at the age of 6, it didn't feel right, so I walked closer to my grandparents and stayed next to them. I soon forgot about my weird encounter, though, as we were beginning to have fun. For the rest of the day, we played card games, sat next to the campfire as we ate dinner, and stared up at the stars. I always loved seeing stars, never being anywhere where we lived. We started to get sleepy around 9 p.m., I believe, and we started to get ready for bed. There were bunk beds that me and my Grammy would sleep on, keeping our luggage on the top bunk, and we would sleep on the bottom bunk. Due to my Grampy's snoring, he would sleep on the couch in the trailer. I would always sleep next to the trailer window, just in case I couldn't sleep and wanted to look outside. I fell asleep pretty quick, though. That being the last day of school and all, I was pretty exhausted. I remember waking up maybe hours later. It was pitch black outside. It wasn't weird for me to wake up late at night, since I always had sleeping issues. I rolled onto my side, trying to fall back to sleep, until I heard Sugar Booger. My eyes immediately shot open as I heard my nickname being spoken, but I knew it wasn't either my grandparents. They were both asleep, and never were known to sleep talk before. I started to get this horrible feeling in my gut, like whatever I was hearing wanted to really hurt me. Even at the age of 6, I knew this was not normal. Then I started to hear tapping at the trailer window. It was soft, but loud enough for me to hear it. Tap, tap, tap. I just sat there, frozen in fear. I was trying to just brush it off as tree branches or rain, but I just knew it wasn't. I could tell that it was really someone or something tapping on the window. I decided to be brave and look. Big mistake. I pulled the curtain away only to peek, and all I saw were these large yellow eyes. They seemed glassy, yet not entirely real. They looked like a giant teddy bear eyes, but cold and unwelcoming. I remember in that moment I panicked and quickly closed the curtain back up. I then hid under the blanket, that being the only thing I knew what to do when I saw a monster. I could feel tears falling down my face. I had never been so terrified in my life. I just curled up into my Grammy's side and clung to her all night. That damn tapping only got louder and more persistent throughout the night. I don't remember falling asleep, but somehow I did. I do remember my Grampy waking me up around noon, saying, how if I got up quick enough, we could still go fishing. I honestly didn't want to leave the trailer at all, terrified that whatever I saw that night before would be out there. I did eventually go outside, but I was constantly looking around, horrified that whatever saw me last night would get me. My Grammy immediately knew I was scared and pulled me into a hug when she saw, asking me what was wrong. I did tell her what I saw and heard, and surprisingly, she believed me. Next thing I knew, she was telling my Grampy that we were moving campsites. It took a bit to convince him, but he did eventually start to pack up and hook the trailer onto his truck. I was put into the truck so I could properly sleep, but I just couldn't. I kept feeling that I was being watched, thinking that every little noise was the thing I saw, that if I closed my eyes even for a second it would get me. My Grammy wasn't too far from me when I heard it again, but this time it was my actual name, Aaliyah. At that moment I had never seen my Grammy move so fast. She looked into the brush where we heard it, then to me. She then got into the truck with me and pulled me into a tight, protective hug. I began to cry all over again, telling her how I just wanted to go back home. That's when my Grampy got in the truck as well. And since I was sobbing so hard to the point I was coughing, he agreed we'd go home. We started to head out of the campsite. Still hurt that this trip had been ruined by something, but I still didn't know what. That's when something in my head told me to look back. I slowly did, feeling an ice-cold fear wash over me as I saw something. A red fox sitting in the middle of the campsite, sitting there with large yellow eyes. The same red fox of my dream, somehow curling its lips into an eerie smile. After that encounter, we never did go back to that campsite. We did continue to camp, but in a more populated area. I did not tell my grandma what I saw, but she had told me to trust my gut. She knew that I was sensitive to certain entities, and that would help me if I trusted it. Now this would be the end of the story, but I'm afraid it isn't. There is one more encounter I had with this creature, and it was much more terrifying than the first. The second encounter I had was when I was 17 years old, many years later. And by this time, I knew very well what these creatures were, and I was still very paranoid every time I went near wooded areas. I still worried about seeing that fox, but I never really thought about it too much. Me and my two younger siblings were staying at a relative's house for Christmas. Then, living way up in the mountain area, I think they were my great aunt and uncle, but I'm not really sure. Where they lived, there was no service at all, so unless we hooked up into their Wi-Fi, we had no phones. I didn't mind the house, still loving the woods no matter what happened, although at night I hated how they didn't close the window curtains, making it easy for anything outside to see us. But I did feel safe while inside the house, knowing that they would not let anything hurt us. Luckily, it didn't snow where they lived, so we could go outside and run around. They always had this beautiful black lab, being about a year old, named Pam. She was very playful and normally wouldn't listen to anyone but my uncle. Although she was easily excitable, she was a good puppy. One of the days we were there, my little sister and our aunt went out to the store for a nice girl's day. Although I'm a girl, I wanted to go hiking with my uncle and my brother. We left pretty early since the hike we were doing was 4 hours of walking into town. It was a really chilly morning, but since we were doing so much walking, it felt great. We also decided to take Pam, it being a good way for her to get her exercise and have some fun. About maybe an hour into our walk, I started to slow down a bit, wanting to enjoy the beautiful forest. It was so peaceful. I could have honestly stayed there, but as we continued to walk, I started to feel something odd. I noticed how quiet the forest had suddenly become. Hearing only our footsteps and my brother talking to our uncle, Pam noticed it as well, her ears going straight up and growling softly. I started to pick up my pace to get next to my brother, worried that possibly a coyote or a mountain lion were nearby. I knew, though, that they wouldn't be out at this time. Even if they were, didn't walk near the roads. My little brother was only 9 at the time, and being the oldest sibling, my natural instinct was to protect him. My uncle noticed the silence as well, telling us to stay close to him and Pam, who was now next to me and still growling. I began to feel that horrible feeling again, that ice-cold fear I once felt when I was 6. I tried so hard not to think of that creature, but it was all I could worry about. I was scared. I felt like I was back to being that scared 6-year-old little girl again. I had to stop for a moment, though. Seeing my shoelaces had come undone, I quickly kneeled down to tie them back up. Trying to hurry and just get out of there, that's when I heard it. Aaliyah! At that moment, my heart dropped into my stomach, my eyes were widened, and I could just feel myself start to shake from fear. It was right next to me. I heard it clear as day. I slowly turned my head, and there it was. The same red fox, still having those horrid yellow eyes, and that same demented smile. Only this time, I saw it much more clearly. Its fur looked so matted and disgusting. The smell it had was like rotten, decaying flesh mixed with garbage. Its limbs were much too long for a normal fox, the back legs bending completely in the wrong way. Those eyes were still the worst thing about it, but now they looked emptier than I remembered. I wanted to scream, to run, to cry, but I just couldn't. I was frozen, as I was too scared to even blink. Then I heard it speak again. This time, however, it had mimicked my little brother's voice. Found you. Before anything else could happen, Pam suddenly jumped in front of me and started to bark like mad, snapping and growling so aggressively that it scared me out of my frozen trance. When I looked back, it was gone. I used that moment to run over to my brother and uncle, who didn't see what I saw as they were too far ahead by now, but I heard my uncle start to pray and sing a song under his breath, keeping my brother and myself close to him. I was just too scared to even look back, so I just kept my eyes on the ground and refused to stop walking. Pam had stopped barking, but she was still loudly growling and never left my side as we continued our hike. My little brother was a bit worried, but he thought it was just a coyote. When we finally made it into town, my uncle had called our aunt and told her to pick us up, something about it not being safe for us to walk back. Thankfully, she came and got us, but she was confused since we had talked about that hike for days. On the car ride back, Pam never left me alone. She was right with me the entire time. She knew that thing was after me, and she protected me. I was very grateful that she was with us. Who knows what would have happened if she wasn't? When we got back to the house, I was talked to by my uncle and aunt. Once I told them what happened and what I saw, they had started to pray and check that all the locks were shut tight, my aunt putting something around the doors. I now believe it was probably ashes, but I never did find out. Unfortunately, this made our Christmas vacation cut short, as they were worried that I was not safe while still in the woods. We had to be taken home the next day, then making an excuse of how there was an emergency with a friend that they needed to help them out. I felt horrible that this Christmas was ruined, but once I did leave the woods, I truly felt safe again. Before they had to drive us back home, though, they told me that it wasn't my fault, and that luckily it didn't hurt me or the other kids. It did make me feel a little better, but it still brought up a lot of questions and worries. It was still around how, why, what did it want with me? Does it want my soul, my body? Was I just going to be tormented by this thing forever? I still don't have the answers to these questions, and that's what really scares me. Now I've longed to move from California and now live in Kentucky. I do live in the woods, but so far that thing hasn't found me. I know that seems very stupid on my part, but life had changed a lot when I was growing up. I was given no other option to live somewhere else, and my grandpa in Kentucky was kind enough to let me live with him, so please don't call me an idiot for moving back to the woods. I had no other choice. Anyway, while I am happy it has not found me, I'm still worried. Can it still find me? Is it still hunting me? I'm not close to anyone who truly knows how to get rid of this thing. And that's why I'm sharing it now, because hopefully someone can give me some help. Today's final encounter. I wanted to take a moment to let everyone know why I went to the mountains in the first place. I wouldn't have rushed there unless there was a good reason, especially considering I was vacationing in Atlantic Beach and was 6 hours away. I received a call from T and J about an incident that occurred both on Saturday and Sunday night, September 25th and 26th of this year. T and J have a cabin near the North Carolina-Tennessee line. Saturday night they were both outside sitting on their deck when at exactly 5:50 p.m. two Neanderthal appeared, their words, not mine, from the tree line directly in front of their home facing them. T described them both as being tall, lanky men who were both facially deformed and had hairy patches here and there all around their naked bodies. She said the eyes were too large for their faces, but the cranium was tilted to the left side like its head had grown incorrectly, or if there was a huge tumor growing from that side of its head. Jay agreed with T on her description, except Jay took it a bit further. He began to describe to me something that had made the hair stand up on the back of my neck. Jay mentioned that one of these men were holding what seemed to be an arm, and I mean an arm only, the arm of a human person that had been snatched off a man or a woman. He recognized it as a human arm because of a smaller size compared to the feral's arm, and also because Jay is certain he saw a dirty cloth bracelet of some kind on the wrist of the arm. The feral lifted up the arm and took a huge bite out of the arm that he was holding. Jay said the arm looked very purple, swollen, and decayed, and that the feral was carrying the arm around like a snack. T and J smelled an awful smell like dead deer carcass as they stood up and ran inside. T is on the phone with the police while Jay is getting his gun. Jay ran back outside to shoot, but both feral men were gone. But he saw some limbs of the trees still moving. T is on the phone with the police and is having a hard time explaining to the 911 operator what they saw. Other than the flight of these two monsters that had appeared in the woods, they had concerns about the human arm and felt it was very pertinent for the police to know. Long story short, two officers came and they found nothing. The officers didn't quite believe them, but they agreed to search the area. Then Sunday came and T&J attended church. T explained to me that while at church, she asked for a special prayer over her home and property, and explained to the pastor that her and her husband felt like their home was being attacked by Satan, and left it at that. And after church, they returned to their cabin along with their 2 daughters and their spouses and their 2 grandchildren. T and J explained to their adult kids what had happened the night before, and exclaimed that she would rather the grandkids not play outside. The day continued on as normal until 8 p.m., not quite dark. Jay's outside with the 2 son-in-laws when out of nowhere they all smelled the awful smell. They were all startled when a huge flock of birds rushed from the tree line, followed by 15 to 20 frogs leaping in a rush away from the woods. A family of deer suddenly jumped from the corner of the property, heading toward the back of the house into the other side of the forest. The animals were running from something. Then something in the trees moves and grabs their attention. They see a creature standing watching them. It's just standing there looking. This time the creature is described as 6 foot tall, deformed man with huge shoulders, covered in mud and dirt, long black hair, evil face with white cloudy eyes. Its hands were a dirty burlap sack, like a potato sack, that appeared to have something heavy in it. As they were staring at this creature, completely unable to move in shock, T walks outside. She noticed the birds from the kitchen window and wanted to see what was going on. She sees all 3 men staring straight ahead in the woods, completely still, glances up, and that's when she sees it as well. She said she felt the most evil presence she had ever felt, and worse than the night before. The creature only stared at them all, not moving an inch. It looked unreal, like a wax figure. No birds chirping, no sounds from the wood whatsoever. They said the silence and still from the forest was just as scary as seeing the creature. T, frustrated and terrified, yells for it to go away. Everyone is in a panic mode, and they all go back into the house. One of the sons-in-laws, Jay, grabs his cell phone to take a pic, and Jay grabs his gun. Once again, when they return outside, the creature is gone, but the awful smell remained. Interesting fact, the Cherokee simply know it's Pharaoh people and consider them evil, part creature, part human. And there you have it, folks. I do hope you all enjoyed tonight's second half as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. I'd like to thank you for supporting the channel. It is your support that helps the channel to continue to grow and go, and what gives us all a place and a chance to share our experiences and theories judgment-free. Everyone is simply treated with the respect that we deserve. Stay safe, happy, healthy, and ever vigilant, keeping an eye on our children, pets, family, and friends. These creatures are real. These events have happened. Share this information with those you love and care about, and it may just help save their lives someday. Until next time, never stop asking questions, never stop searching for the truth, and God bless.